Hello, everyone. Today is August 18, 2024. We have a simulation, Israeli-Palestinian Confederation simulation with Elik Elhanan. We are proposing a common federal government for the people of Israel and in the area that includes Gaza, the West Bank, Israel, and Jerusalem for approximately 14 million people. We are proposing that a federal government will be elected independently and separately from the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, with a legislative branch, executive branch, and a judicial branch, all equal to Palestinians and Israelis together. 300 parliament members in the legislative branch, president and vice president in the executive branch, one Palestinian, one Israeli, rotating in 2 years, and a judicial branch with Palestinians and Israeli together, making sure that no side is being taken advantage of. We are not proposing the dismantlement of the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. We are proposing creating a federal government for the entire area, independent of the Israeli and the Palestinian government, regardless of whether the Israeli or the Palestinian government agree to it or not. The people of Israel and Palestine own their own lives, and they can create their own government because their own government, the Israeli and the Palestinian government, failed to give them peace and security. And the best way to do it is to create a secular federal government that would treat everyone with respect. Now, you can see you can read the Constitution. If you go to ipconfederation.org and go and click on Constitution, you'll be able to read the Constitution. It's in 3 languages, Hebrew, English, and Arabic. And you can also read the frequently asked questions that explains what this federal government is about and how it will be created. My name is Joseph Avisar, and you could reach me at josephavisar@gmail.com. Today's guest speaker is Elik Elhanan. Elik Elhanan served in Special Forces Unit in the Israeli Defense Forces from 1995 to 1998, operating extensively in South Lebanon and the West Bank. In 1997, his 14-year-old sister was killed by a suicide bomber in Jerusalem. Elik is also a military refusenik. He joined Courage to Refuse in 2002 and co-founded the Israeli-Palestinian group Combatants for Peace in 2005, becoming its Israeli director in 2006 to 2007. Elik has been a longtime member of the Parents Circle Family Forum. In 2012, he participated in a mission with the Swedish boat S/V Estelle to challenge the Israeli blockade of Gaza. Elik earned his PhD in Middle East Studies from Columbia University and currently works as a professor teaching Yiddish and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at City College in New York. Elik is also he is the grandson of Mati Peled, who was a colonel in the Israeli army, especially in 1967 when the West Bank was taken over by Israel, and his grandfather changed 180 degrees and became a very strong force for peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. On September 1st, we will have Jill Stein, who is running for president, and we will have a simulation with her. On September 15, we will have Maoz Inon and Aziz Abu Sara. Maoz lost both his parents on October 7th, 2023, and Aziz lost his brother who was tortured in Israeli prison. They are combining their forces because they realize that the violence cannot go on, that the governments of Israel and Palestine are incapable of giving peace to their own people. And here you have people who have suffered personally from this conflict who are saying enough is enough. On September 29, we will have Khalil Sayag. He's a political analyst who is focusing on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He lived most of his life in Gaza and the West Bank and holds a Master of Political Science in Political Science from American University. We are demonstrating in this simulation how a common federal government will thread the needle. What does it mean? It means that it could be created and it could pass legislation that neither the Israeli nor the Palestinian governments will be able to challenge or veto because it would benefit the people of Israel and Palestine. And that's what we are showing in this simulation. We are demonstrating that. This is not a lecture. This is a simulation. We are asking that you will respect what we are trying to show and hold your comments and put them in the chat. If you have questions, then please use the chat feature on the Zoom for question. Nasir is the administrator of the questions. He looks up all the questions on the chat and he will coordinate the questions as we go along. So your question will be asked, but it will, once you put it on the chat. We have a short video that explains what this idea is about. I'd like to play that short video for you. It's 2 minutes.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations, and instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we are actually simulating what's in that video. We will ask you to participate as either Israeli or Palestinian parliament members. But at this time, we would like to conduct a survey, which we will compare to another survey at the end of the simulation. Do you support a common federal government for the people of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza that will be common and for the purpose of making peace? Please vote at this time. Do you support it or not? Just yes or no. I understand that some of you are not able to vote because you're on your phone or for other reasons. We are, Dan, myself, and Nasir are not able to vote. Okay, let's give it another 5 seconds for people to vote. So can you publish the vote? 59 out of 62 voted yes, which is 95%, and 3 out of 62 voted no, which is 5%. And we'll see if we change hearts by the end of the simulation today. We also have an open discussion today, and the open discussion is a Jewish state good for Jews? I'd like to please vote on that, yes or no, at this time. Do you believe that a Jewish state is good for Jews? Vote yes or no. Dan, can you put the voting?
Oh, come on.
Can you please unmute yours? Okay, publish the vote. 12 out of 16, 12 out of 63, 19% voted yes. And 51 out of 63, 81% voted no. All right, thank you. And we will have an open discussion about that during the simulation. We defined a confederation or federation in the same way. Confederation and federal government exist worldwide to address specific conflicts. Some governments refer to themselves as federal governments, while others use the term confederation. Definitions are not fixed and involved with changing realities. In the context of Israel and Palestine, the IPC defines confederation as a shared government for the people of Israel and Palestine, guided by democratic principles outlined in the IPC Constitution, which can be found at ipconfederation.org. This is an answer for those who ask, are you a federation or a confederation? We are defined both of them in the same way. This is a simulation. We're asking you to make some assumptions. And the assumptions are as follows. First, that the IPC, the organization, was able to obtain major funding to make the people of Israel and Palestine aware of the idea of a federal government and make them aware that they can vote for their parliament and for their president. That the major funding will allow us to recruit parliament members, Palestinians and Israelis in their district, and will allow us to explain to the people of Israel and Palestine the benefit of the federal government, that it's not going to harm their identity or security. In fact, it's going to add to their security and stability. And we will be able to explain why a federal government is beneficial to their lives and to their future and security. The other thing that you need to assume is that the election allowed 14 million people, with the exclusion of children, to vote in the whole area, Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. They will all have equal right to vote. Each district will vote for parliament and for president. Whoever is elected president is the person who received the most number of votes, and the person who received the second number of votes of the other nationality will be vice president, and they will rotate in 2 years. We are also asking you to assume that 5 million people voted, that actually voted. We are simulating that. We are pretending that this has occurred, and that's how we are conducting the simulation. So that 5 million people voted, 3 million Palestinian voted, and 2 million Israeli voted. You will also have to assume for the purpose of this simulation, from now on, while we are conducting the simulation, we are conducting it on that basis that the president received 1.5 million votes. You'll have to assume that me, Joseph, was elected as president. So that you know, I do not intend to ever run for president. I'm not qualified to be president under the Constitution because I do not reside in Israel or Palestine. But you'll have to assume, for the purpose of this simulation, that I am the president of the whole area, and my responsibility is for the whole area. And I have a vice president, Palestinian lady, who received 1.3 million votes, and we will rotate in 2 years. I will become vice president in 2 years, and she will become president, but we both have constitutional duties throughout the 4 years. You'll also have to assume that 300 parliament members were elected in 300 districts. I will ask you, the audience, to become parliament members in this simulation. This is a simulation. You are part of the simulation. You are asked to be parliament member, either Palestinian or Israelis, and each parliament member, each one of you, represent 47,000 people in your district. If you have any questions regarding those assumptions, please put them in the chat. But at this time, I'd like to turn to Elik and ask Elik, do you have any comments or questions regarding these assumptions? Elik, you need to unmute.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here. I mean, this came up in our preliminary talk and also right now in the chat. And in a certain sense, the only problem I have with these assumptions is that I feel they don't take into account the very complex social and ethnic structure in Israel-Palestine between the river and the sea. Mainly
Well,
the fact that
I don't understand. I don't understand your comment.
I didn't finish. 1 second.
Okay.
Very much. I mean, this is a problem that Palestinians have pointed out ever since the plan of partition. But what you will have here is many districts with an absolute Palestinian majority, and then many districts that are mixed, Jewish Palestinians, and very few with a Palestinian majority over with a Jewish minority. And add to that the different other minorities that live in Israel that might or might not identify as Israeli and or Palestinians, like the Bedouins, the Druze, Cherkess, etc. It seems to me that here the definition of nationality is very much procedural, having to do with citizenship, rather than with the sentiment of a national identity that I believe is detrimental. In a region, and I can't really see how these assumptions deal with this issue. I mean, this caveat refers to the final point. Besides that, I have no problem with these assumptions.
All right. Just to answer your question or your comment, the identity of the voters is immaterial. Whether you are a Bedouin or Jewish or Palestinian, your identity is immaterial. You can vote for whoever you want, regardless of whether you are Palestinian or Israeli. So your identity, when you vote, is immaterial. Your identity when you are elected makes a difference. Then you can if you are putting yourself to be elected, then your identity, whether you are Palestinian or Israeli, makes a difference. And that's how you will have to declare yourself, whether you are Palestinian or Israeli. That's the general categories of identification in this federal government. All right, thank you. So at this time, I'm going to ask you, the audience, to act as either to choose whether you are a parliament member, Israeli or Palestinian, and you'll have to make a decision in your own mind whether you represent a district that is Israeli, mostly Jewish, or mostly Palestinian, or a mixed district, or exclusively Israeli or Palestinian, because you will have to vote based on what's good for your district, not based on your own personal opinion on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because now that you are part of the assumption and you are a parliament member, your responsibility changes. Your responsibility is towards your district. So at this time, I'd like to ask you to identify, and I'll show you a map of the whole area. I don't know if it's still possible. Yes. So here is a map of the whole area, and you can decide whether you are a Palestinian or an Israeli parliament member in this simulation. Remember, it's a simulation. It's not a lecture. Okay, I'll give it 5 more seconds. Okay, interestingly enough, again, can you publish the vote? We have 26 Palestinian parliament members in this, and we have 23 Israeli parliament members. So you'll have to decide who you represent, what your district that you represent, and you will have to act in this simulation as a parliament member responsible to identify, to benefit your district, for the benefit of your district, not for your own benefit. And your responsibility is not towards the Palestinian people or the Israeli people, it's your district. I am the president. My responsibility is the entire area of Israel, Palestine. Now, I already contacted 2 people to act as Israeli Prime Minister. We have Jeff Warner, who will act as Israeli Prime Minister in this simulation. And we have Elik Elhanan, who is acting as a Palestinian president in this simulation. And they are the ones that are not allowed to vote in the common federal government because they are in a separate government. But they are allowed to, they will be giving a veto power once the legislation passes, if it affects their sovereignty. All right. All right, let's go to our first order of business. Just remember, we just elected 300 parliament members. You are the parliament member. I'm the president. Our first order of business is to pass or to ratify a constitution. Libby, are you here? Would you be willing to read out the constitution, please?
Yes, I would. We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
If you have any questions regarding the Constitution, put them in the chat, and I'll ask Elik if he has any comments or questions. But before I do that, I'd like to explain the most important parts is we are a federal government. We are separate from the Israeli and the Palestinian government. We do not intend to supersede or supplant. In other words, we don't intend to overthrow the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We recognize their existence. We are here to work with them. They can agree to whatever they want between themselves, including a two-state solution, a one-state solution, or any other constellation of any other solution. Constitutionally, we are bound to accept their agreement. We agree to give them a veto power if we pass legislation that affects their sovereignty. So constitutionally, we are required to give them a veto power if our legislation affects their sovereignty. Again, if you have any questions regarding this Constitution, put it in the chat, and Nasir will relay those questions to us. But before we ask Elik to make his comments regarding this Constitution, I'd like to have the Parliament vote. First of all, Palestinian Parliament members, you need to ratify the Constitution. But let me just tell you that you must accept the Constitution, because if you do not ratify it, you will be expelled from the Parliament, just like any other democratic government. Parliament members are required to accept the Constitution. So let's have the Palestinian Parliament members please vote. All right, publish the vote. Okay, 97% of the Palestinian Parliament members voted yes. One person voted no. So that person is expelled from the Parliament. He or she will not be able to vote. And whoever gets the second number of votes in his or her district will become Parliament member as long as he or she accepts the Constitution. Let's go to the Israeli Parliament members. Please vote. Israeli Parliament members. You need to ratify the Constitution. Publish the vote. 96% of the Israeli Parliament members voted yes. One person voted no. That means that that person is not going to be part of our Parliament. He is expelled from the Parliament, and the second number of the person who received the second number of votes in his or her district will become Parliament member as long as he or she accepts the Constitution. So congratulations, we have a Constitution. Let's go to Elik and give him an opportunity to make comments regarding this Constitution. Elik, please.
Yes, thank you again. I mean, in principle, these ideas seems solid and necessary for the functioning of this confederation. However, there are several things that are left kind of hazy and I think need to be addressed. One is a question of definition. we talk about giving the respective governments veto power over legislation relating. I
To
mean,
their
here the
sovereignty.
letter is relating to the domain of control of those governments. You said sovereignty. I can see how these two overlap, and I find that ill-defined. What topics do not fall under the question of sovereignty that will be in the domain of the federal government. Now, I will specify when I say that, again, like with the question of citizenship and identity, I think we should be wary of a procedural definition of sovereignty and kind of the more philosophical, ideological idea of sovereignty, independence, and autonomy as a constitutive element of nationalist movements. And in that sense, I see a quagmire here. I see a terrain where you can't really distinguish what is a question of sovereignty and what is not. The second point I'll make, and has to do, I mean, with the core principle of every state, and that is the monopoly of violence. And how does that function? And in particular, we're talking about a separate judicial branch relating to the IPC legislations. What about enforcement? And again, how does that not collide with the question of sovereignty?
All right, the question of sovereignty will be addressed in our legislation coming up. And the question of enforcement, there are three branches to this government: a legislative, a judicial, and an executive. The enforcement will have to be done by the executive through legislation that is passed by the parliament. But nevertheless, we passed the Constitution. There are people who are questioning its whether it is a perfect constitution. We agree it's not a perfect constitution. We cannot come up with a perfect constitution, especially when we have a very strong Israeli and Palestinian governments that are in our way, and we have to work around them in order to be able to function. So we will explain the question of sovereignty soon, but we should not be missing the importance of this moment. And the importance of this moment is that, congratulations, this is the first time in history of the Middle East, in the history of the world, that in the area of Israel, the Palestinian and the Israeli Christian, Muslim, and Jews were able to agree on a constitution. This is not an insignificant event. It's a momentous occasion, because now the Constitution undermines the existing government's use of fear and hate to justify their action. It removes the collective stigma against Israelis and Palestinians that we are incapable of making peace, and that we are destined to be enemies of each other forever. It provides huge political capital to the parliament, to the president, to me as the president. Now I have huge political capital that I am going to spend all over the world for the benefit of Israel and Palestine, because what we have done is a momentous occasion that has not been replicated ever in the history of the world. It compels the governments of the world and other organizations to contribute to our success. I'm going to use that political power to demand that the other governments of the world who claim to want peace to contribute to our success. And it gives us, the people of Israel and Palestine, a new self-image. So congratulations. We have created a tremendous change in the outlook of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how we are seeing around the world. Thank you. And congratulations to all you parliament members and to the whole world. Now, we are now passing the first legislation that is going to deal with what Elik questioned, and that's the question of sovereignty. Libby, could you please read the legislation regarding granting a veto power?
All right. The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian government on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in the entirety of the Israeli or Palestinian governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed subject to the IPC Constitution. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
So this legislation deals directly with what Elik questioned. The issue of sovereignty is not going to be a vague question. It's not going to be defined by the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We are the federal government, and we decide what violates the sovereignty of Israeli or the Palestinian government based on whether the Israeli or the Palestinian government are indispensable regarding a particular legislation that we pass. It's not a general term about sovereignty. It's directly related to specific legislation we pass. A government is indispensable if its cooperation is necessary to implement the IPC legislation. So example of indispensability, the use of land. If we pass legislation regarding the use of land, then the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are indispensable. They get veto power on legislation we pass regarding the use of land, regarding police force, regarding removal of the wall. However, they are dispensable. We can pass legislation without giving them a veto power on issue relating to IPC budgets, about ratifying the Constitution, or appointing IPC ministers. Why do we give them a veto power? A veto power provides a safety net to both sides, so that both the Israeli and the Palestinian side understand that we are not trying to overturn their government, and we are not trying to impede their sovereignty or their identity. So it gives them a safety net to accept the IPC. It increases the likelihood of the Israelis and Palestinians' participation. The people of Israel and Palestine are more likely to participate in the election and to be running for parliament if they understand that their governments have a safety net. It decreases the Israeli and Palestinian government's opposition. They basically have no reason to oppose it because they have a veto power. They are part of the system rather than being in opposition to the system. It removes any claim that the IPC is a subversive intentions, and it gives legal protection to the candidates, those that will become parliament members, Israelis and Palestinians, and those who will become president and vice president. It compels the IPC to thread the needle. It compels us, the parliament and the executive branch to find legislation that is least objectionable to the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, and it creates a platform for negotiation with a deadline. And if you have any questions regarding this legislation, put it on the chat. And I don't hear from Nasir, so I assume there are no questions. But if Nasir is
yeah, let me Joseph, let me just say something. There sometimes people bring up questions, but I'm only gonna if it's a question that's answered later on in the presentation, I will let it be answered. If it's a question that's not related to the topic or the legislation, I will respond in the chat, but I only want to pose questions that are related to the actual presentation and actual the laws that are presented.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. All right, so let's go to let's do the voting, and then we'll go to Elik to give us his comments regarding this legislation. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on this legislation. Do you accept, or are you willing to pass this legislation to allow a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian governments on issues that violates their sovereignty? Palestinian parliament members, please vote. We need 55% on each side. Okay, publish the vote. 89% of the Palestinian parliament members agreed to give the Israeli and the Palestinian government a veto power on legislation affecting their sovereignty. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. We need 55% of the Israeli parliament members. Now you can see how Palestinians and Israelis agree on issues that are threading the needle, that are acceptable to both sides. Publish the vote. 87% of the Israeli parliament members agreed on this legislation. So congratulations, this important legislation was passed. Let's go to Elik and hear his comments regarding this legislation that was just passed by the parliament. Well, let me ask you a question. Was the issue of sovereignty, was that made clearer to you at this time?
Well, I mean, it was made clearer to me, and it was clear also before. I just think it's a narrow limit, a narrow definition of sovereignty that might not work in the particular context that we are talking about. I mean, sovereignty is defined as where the government is indispensable. It only relates to the, how should I say, to the
Specific legislation.
also to specific legislation, but also an idea of sovereignty where you are sovereign, one is sovereign when one can exercise power. Now, this is not the idea of sovereignty that we are talking about in the context of Israel-Palestine and in the context of national movements in general, where the idea of sovereignty has much more to do with identity and with controlling symbolic resources and not only exercising agency over practical matters. So I think in a certain sense, without recognition of that aspect and without a certain platform to discuss these aspects, I mean, the question of sovereignty remains unclear. I mean, if we go back to the slide with the indispensable. I mean, the question of education or a question of cultural funding. etc. Does that fall under, does that violate the sovereignty or doesn't violate the sovereignty of respective nations? I mean, this is, for example, a problem that we can see right now in the EU and its opposition that also deals with a very narrow idea of sovereignty that does have a very large educational and cultural apparatus that is supposed to supersede these issues, and we can see that this is a major source of contention over there. So I do think that these are things to think about sovereignty as not only the domain where a certain government can exercise its power, but rather as a constituent of identity, which is very important in our political discussion. This is one point.
Can I just respond to you? The question of sovereignty, I agree with you. We define it very narrowly, and we define it purposely so very narrowly, because our goal is to thread the needle and to make sure that legislation passes. So basically, we define sovereignty is if we can do without that government, then they don't have a veto power. If that other government, whether it's the Israeli or the Palestinian government, can block us, then we give them a veto power. That means that we violate their sovereignty.
I mean, absolutely, I understand that. I just think this is a problem, I mean, in the realm of theory and in the realm of the construction, I mean, of the very idea of a confederation that needs to be discussed. I mean, this is also, I mean, it's a topic that relates very closely to my work and my academic work, as I talked, I mean, in the case of the EU, where the certain umbrella of values and ideas about history and democracy, etc., were considered to be not a question of sovereignty, but a question of, let's say, where governments are dispensable, and was given to the EU and not to the respective governments, which, I mean, you look at what happens in Poland, in Hungary, in the Baltic states, in anywhere in Europe, this is understood as a major violation of these countries' sovereignty. The commitment to secularism, even the idea that the Germans and their accomplices are not the victims of World War II. I mean, all of these are ideas that are very contentious and are all experienced as an attack on the respective government's sovereignty in a manner that, I mean, states and governments do not have a way of appealing because it was ruled indispensable or something like that. Now, this is one issue I wanted to point out. I don't know how you square this particular circle, but it is a major issue. Going the complete other direction, I mean, accepting the definition of sovereignty as you put it, I am afraid that it might relegate the confederation to being irrelevant, because it would seem here that, I mean, dispensable means only decisions that pertain to the functioning and working of the confederation apparatus itself. And then, I mean, it's very hard to see what would be the impact on the lives of Israelis and Palestinians and where the political capital will come from. If the only decision we can ratify has to do with our budget, with our constitution, with our appointments, with our, again, we come here a little bit to the model of the EU, where you have a big apparatus that is meant to put out of the way a whole political body, a whole political pad that they'll be engaged with funding and perpetuating their own functions, but nothing to do with the affairs of states. So this is another problem that I see here with this kind of an extensive definition of what is indispensable. The other problem I see with that comes from a little bit from the other direction, and this is, we are here in somewhat of a circuitous system. If the parliament decides what's indispensable or dispensable, where does it garner its
The
authority from?
indispensability issue, it has to do with enforcement. If we cannot enforce the legislation, the government, the Israeli and the Palestinian or the Palestinian governments become indispensable. It
But
has
this
to
is a
do
matter
with
if
practicality, basically. It has.
Okay, I'm sorry, Joseph, maybe I misunderstood, but if it's a matter of practicality, then why is there a vote? Can't the parliament member vote in opposition to that idea if it's open to
Yeah,
a...
they can vote, or yes, they can vote in opposition to any legislation. Yes,
So they
except
can
one.
basically decide on what's indispensable and what's dispensable. And again, there is a certain authority that is relegated to them. Now, again, you said yourself the question of enforcement.
Correct.
That has to do with sovereignty, which brings us back to the comment I had about the Constitution, where there's no discussion of the monopoly of violence and how decisions of the Confederation are being enforced.
Can you cite any constitution in the world that has a discussion about the monopoly of violence?
I'm afraid my
And I don't know of any. There may be, but the Constitution. I researched many constitutions. I've never seen any constitution that discusses the monopoly of violence. The Constitution usually deals about how the government is functioned, what are the rights and limitations of the government, and what is the rights and the limitation of the people. There are issues it's not discussing. Monopoly of violence, I never heard that before in the context of a constitution. So I don't think that's a fair criticism. It doesn't have the monopoly of violence. I don't think there is such thing as a monopoly of violence. We are here to...
By monopoly of violence, I'm of course referring to the Weberian concept that says that only the state has the right to exercise violence, meaning use the army and the police and other law enforcement agencies to enforce its decisions. Any other body enforcing decisions would be criminal and illegal. This is what I mean
Why
by the
would
concept of the monopoly of violence. Now, again, I'm not a big expert on that question, but I'm sure that other constitutions deal with who enforces laws on the state level, on the federal level, on other different level. What happens in the case that a law is passed and then not followed? Who enforces it?
Look, we are not claiming monopoly on anything, because once we claim monopoly, we become a subversive organization to the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. We are not claiming monopoly. We cannot claim monopoly. We are saying whenever the legislation violates your sovereignty, we give you a veto power. So we do not want to be seen, and that's what we explained on the question of why are we giving a veto power?
Okay,
we can change that to why are we not a monopoly? We are not a monopoly because we don't want to, we provide a safety net to both sides. If we claim to be a monopoly, the Jewish side or the Palestinian side will not accept us. A monopoly, if we claim to be a monopoly, that increases the likelihood of Israelis and it decreases the likelihood of Israelis and Palestinians participation. If we claim monopoly, it increases the Israeli and the Palestinian government's opposition to us. If we claim a monopoly,
So
it would validate the idea that we are a subversive organization. We are not claiming a monopoly.
I understand, and again, I mean, I definitely understand this position. As I said, it's not an unfamiliar position. This is the position of the European Union. For example, the problem there that I might point to is that such a body is relegated to irrelevancy.
Elik, with all due respect, we are not copying the European formula. We are creating a formula that is specific to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I don't think that it's valid to compare us positively or negatively to any other federal system. We create a federal system based on our needs, based on...
I am a comparatist by trade, so it comes naturally to me, but I can't treat this as a sui generis.
right.
Joseph, can I say
Joseph,
something?
I'm sorry, Shlomo, before you say something, there's a question directly related to this bill, and I think it could be help with what Alazar, both and Joseph are talking about. Don Raphael poses a question: what happens if IPC law is not vetoed, but the Israeli and Palestinian government does not then follow the law? So I think that's kind of directly related to what you guys are talking.
This is the problem I'm talking about. Yes.
Well, what happens if any government does not follow the law? Why is this question only being brought to the federal government? But I'll answer that question. If they do not follow the law, then they do it at their own peril, because they cannot claim anymore that there are no other ways to resolve the conflict. There is other ways. We are a legitimate government of the people of Israel and Palestine. We are elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. We are more legitimate than the Israeli and the Palestinian government because we are the only government that is elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. So those governments, whether it's the Israeli or the Palestinian governments, that do not have legitimacy from the entire area, if they decide to ignore the legislation that benefits the people of Israel and Palestine, they will do it at their own peril. They will lose legitimacy within their own people and internationally. We are an independent government. I am the president. I will point out day in and day out that there is a way to resolve the conflict, and whoever government decides to ignore the legislation is acting against his own people. He's a danger to his own people.
Yes.
Shlomo, go ahead, Shlomo.
Yes, it's true. It is true now with the Confederation. They are the enemies of their own people. No, given. Okay, so 2 points. One, I agree with Elik about comparing it to the EU, and maybe stick with this.
Shlomo, we're not having a conversation here. We are having a question and answer.
All right.
We need
Okay,
to
there
move
is a
on to
question.
more legislation.
Okay, all right. Okay, there is another question. Who represent the Palestinians? Is it Hamas? Is it the PA? But the PA is a servant of Israel, so there is no really government.
Whoever can block us, we decide who is the Israeli and the Palestinian government. It says here, the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable. The Palestinian government on issues in which it is indispensable. We are the federal government. We decide who is the Israeli or the Palestinian government, specifically regarding a specific legislation. And our criteria is whether they are dispensable or not. we're not here in the political business of being pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian.
No, this is
We're
not
here-
my question. No, the question is sovereignty. Okay, so there is anything like sovereignty of the Palestinians, and if so, who is in charge there? And
Look, we are not solving the issue of sovereignty in the abstract. We are solving the issue of sovereignty with regard to specific legislation. I
Okay.
understand that that could be confusing, but the issue of sovereignty is defined by us on whether or not the legislation is, whether or not we can implement the legislation, not based on the total discussion of sovereignty between the Israeli and the Palestinian government.
I mean, but this is a very, I think, a pointed question. Let's say, as for my district, as a parliament member, we want to promote a project of renewable energy, and there's a uniquely suited place in the mountains or in the hills of South Hebron for such a project.
Okay. All right, very
Which
good,
government
very
is
good, very
indispensable?
good, very good example. Okay.
Which government is indispensable? Who gets to veto that?
All right. Who has the, first of all, we need to have 300 parliament members voting on this, okay? Are we getting 55% of the Israeli parliament members and 55% of the Palestinian parliament members to agree on that?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, good. So, so now who has the physical power to prevent us from implementing those turbine? Who has it? Is it the Israelis?
Israel, because it's the occupying
Okay,
force.
so they
It's
are
the sovereign.
okay, so if in that physical location, then there is the Israeli government is the powerful government that can prevent us from putting they become the indispensable government. So we need to go and work legislation with them and also with the Palestinian government, because these turbines will have an effect all over the West Bank. So both of them will be indispensable. Now, are you questioning? Okay.
Okay.
All right, let's go to the legislation that you chose to discuss. And that is teaching tolerance and understanding. Okay. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
Both educational systems to teach tolerance in their public schools. Devote a certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the Israelis and the Palestinians. Prioritizing teaching Arabic and Hebrew in public schools to achieve proficiency of both languages by Israeli and Palestinian students. Create a mutual task force to ensure the teaching of both languages. Educators to draft textbooks together and arrange for a regular exchange of teachers. Public media on both sides to provide fair and equal coverage daily for teaching tolerance. IPC as facilitator to ensure that both sides are fairly represented. And we hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government and the Palestinian governments, and we bestow upon them a veto power, which they may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Okay, again, if you have any questions regarding this legislation, put it on the chat. If you do not have any question, let's move quickly and have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. Do you support teaching tolerance and understanding? Palestinian parliament members? This legislation clearly violates the sovereignty of Israel and Palestine. We will give the Israeli and the Palestinian leaders a veto power. Okay, publish the vote. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Israeli parliament members, please vote. Okay, publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. So let's go to the Prime Minister of Israel. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
No, Israel will not veto this legislation. Israel feels it's about time for this legislation to happen. Israel already teaches tolerance, and the distinction with the Palestinians is that they teach hate. We hope that this legislation will change that. Thank you.
The President of Palestine, Mr. President, are you going to veto this legislation? Mr. President of Palestine. Rami?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult for me because I'm looking at the whole discussion from a point of view of incompetence. I mean, we have to get permission from the Americans and the Israelis to move from one room to another in our house. We are not in a place of putting veto on anything. We have no power. This is not an equal symmetry conflict.
We are giving you a veto power. You have equal power as the Prime Minister of Israel.
Yeah, I can use it, but I have to consider all the powers within my state, my system, my society. And
no, you don't. You don't have to do that. You just have to veto this specific legislation. You don't have to incorporate other issues into this.
I don't see how can you be a prime minister of anything without considering all the facts. You don't get to put veto on something which you don't consider all the necessary circumstances.
What possible negative implications would there be for your government to agree to the teaching, tolerance, and understanding by both sides?
The question is, what is teaching tolerance and understanding? What is tolerance? Are you demanding us to forget about what happened to us in 48?
No, we do not.
67?
No, we do not. We do not. That would be part of the teaching. Both sides will teach the history of each side.
What do you call tolerance? What is tolerance?
Well, that would be a part of the curriculum. The people of our government will sit with the people of your government. Whatever it is that you decide to be taught.
But we are not equals. We never have been equals, and I don't see any.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We are equal. We are a separate government. We are a separate government. We are giving you a veto power, and what you are trying to do, Mr. President, is you trying to get into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with the Israeli government. Well, you're not being constructive here.
Well, I'm not in the business of being constructive. I'm in the business of trying to be real. And what's going on here is not real because it does not take into account the layers and layers of history of bad atmosphere, of bloodbath between two sides, of history on our backs, of racism, of Jewish superiority, all the things that needs to be into the account.
Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. President, I am the president of the whole area of Israel, Palestine, okay? I can tell you, man to man, just in private, that if you decide to veto this legislation, I have no choice but to go all over the world, and it gives me no pleasure to tell the world that the Israeli Prime Minister agreed to teach tolerance and understanding, and the failed Palestinian president, who did not give peace or prosperity to the Palestinian government, does not agree with his own people of Palestine who
But it is
voted.
always the case, putting the Palestinians on a spot that if they say no, then they are excluded. If they say no, they are not part of the equation.
No, we are putting you on the spot. The Palestinian
I'm as a representative of the Palestinian people, can look you in the eye and say, I don't agree.
Well, no, they already voted.
Oh, okay.
They already voted. They voted in favor of this legislation. We have about 150 Palestinian parliament members who are elected by the people of Palestine. By the way, you are not elected. You're not elected. You are not a legitimate president. I don't want to force that issue. But we have parliament members who are elected by the Palestinian people who agreed with this legislation. You're an unelected person who is really serving the Israeli government and are kidnapping this whole conversation by claiming that you are representing the Palestinian people. We have true representatives of the Palestinian people, which are the parliament members. So are you going to veto this legislation?
Let's say for the sake of argument, I will not veto it.
All right, thank you. Thank you. You are a true man of peace. That conversation we had was in person. No one knows about it. I will continue to remain your friend, and we will continue to have diplomatic relations. So thank you. We passed this legislation. Let's go to our speaker, Elik Elhanan. So you've seen in almost as real as it could be, the discussion that the president of the whole area, me, having with the leaders of Israel and Palestine, and to force them in a way to accept this legislation. What do you think, Elik?
Well, I mean, a bit on the spot because there's a moratorium here on comparisons to the European Union, but I think that such a comparison is very pertinent and very, very needed, even if we do create a completely new political system, sui generis. It could still benefit us to learn from other examples. And I think that what we have here brings in many of the questions that I brought up. And I will say again, I mean, this type of scenario is not abstract for me, but is very concrete and has very much to do with my own personal academic work beyond the scope of this meeting. So maybe you can treat it as an expert advice. But these questions of education, and we'll break it down into a number of levels. First of all, the whole idea of kind of a global, a confederate, an education program on the federal level. If we take the example of the European Union, and we deal with the question of Jewish education and Jewish history, which is my field of expertise, we can see that a certain understanding on the causes, roots, and conclusions to derive from the National Socialist period and the Holocaust and the aftermath of World War II were experienced by most while it was established on the federal level, on the level of the European Union. Most countries, particularly those countries from the Eastern Bloc, perceived it as a violation of their sovereignty. The need to recognize that the Nazis were the bad ones, the Soviets were the good ones, or the anti-Nazis were the good ones, presented a real problem. And while we think that there is a common understanding of history, this is not the case, because there are many, many, many layers when we agree to treat issues like sovereignty and that not as procedural issues, but rather as subjective constituents of identity, then we come across these issues. For example,
We're not proposing a common history. We are proposing each side to present his history.
But in a certain sense, we are, because you're talking about the history of
No,
tolerance.
we're not. We're not. This is a
One second,
legislation.
Mr.
Each
President,
side.
let me finish. You brought an
Okay.
expert witness. Let me finish and share my
Okay,
expertise.
sorry.
You talk about tolerance and you talk about understanding. Okay? These are, I believe, the terms, the European terms, as elaborated in the liberal thought in Europe since the 17th century onwards. When you bring these ideas and impose them on a colonized nation that doesn't understand European history as the advancement of tolerance and understanding, but rather as the encroachment of exploitation and oppression, you are enforcing a vision of history. From the perspective of many, many people in the global South, understanding and tolerance are code names for the educational and cultural practices of colonialism. And this is something that is very problematic to impose. Or let's say, forget, not without judging the desire to impose it or not, this is something that will definitely be experienced as an attack on sovereignty of one of the sides, because one of the sides need to give up on their interpretation of history. Meaning, when Europeans came to us, they did not bring understanding and tolerance, they brought colonialism and exploitation. And now all of a sudden, they get to teach us what is what. There is a major problem here that, I mean, again, I'm saying this is not a deadlock, but we need to have certain technologies to discuss this and to come to terms with these issues. What is understood in Israel and in the West as a beneficial, benevolent story can be understood in a very different way from the other side. And a mechanism to kind of working through these differences is necessary. Now,
Are you against the idea of Palestinians teaching Israelis their version of history? And
absolutely not. But this is what I'm saying. And again, you stumble upon something that I am, in a sense, kind of, I know a little bit about. And the modalities for dual narrative education, binational education, are something that people are trying very hard to put in place. But it is in contradiction with the indoctrinating nature of centralized education by the state. And there is a political and theoretical question here that needs to be addressed. And waiving it would necessarily entail the experience of somebody's sovereignty being infringed. For example, did the Jews return to their ancestral home, or is this a case of illegitimate settler colonialism? Both interpretations of histories exist. Which one do we teach?
both.
Both as equal narratives?
Yes. Basically, that the Palestinians would teach their narrative
In their schools.
to the Palestinians and the Israelis, and the Israelis will teach their narrative to the Palestinians and the Israelis, and will let the people decide what is it that they want to adopt or believe. But they will have to understand what the other side thinks. It doesn't, that's what I was trying to tell you at the beginning. We are not coming up with one system for an agreement on the system. We are saying each side can teach both sides their narrative.
Okay, so I think the wording of the law need to be
Okay, so how would you correct it?
devote a certain number of hours for both. for I don't know, an introduction of the national narrative of either side. Because, I mean, the idea that the concept of history is a solid, unified object that you can say truth or false about, that things happen this way or that way, I mean, this is a very problematic and politically charged idea. If there's anything people don't agree about is the, I mean, course of history and its interpretation. And in that case, I mean, I would also specify that tolerance means the capacity to withhold and contain the narrative of the other, even if it questions yours. Because, I mean, this is a very strong claim of the Israeli governments against the Palestinian.
Okay, so I changed that to both educational system to teach tolerance of both sides, to teach, I'm sorry, to teach history and political narrative of both sides in both public schools.
Okay, I mean, but this is a very different proposition. That's
Okay, it's not set in stone. We are
okay,
a parliament.
fantastic.
Okay.
Fantastic. I am very happy to see that you are attentive to the opinions of experts. That really puts you
Yes.
right.
Can I ask
in regards to other governments?
Can I ask a question regarding this to Elazar?
Yeah.
So when you said about which narrative should be taught about the Jews returning to their ancestral homeland from 3,000 years ago versus a settler colonial state, teaching them is not necessarily meaning that you're establishing them, but maybe make it aware, because I'm a Palestinian and I know that we are very, like, I don't want to say we're detached from that, but we don't understand that the way Israelis do. So teaching it in the school doesn't necessarily saying that we're establishing it as fact, but we're establishing it as this is something that people believe.
I understand. I just think that I mean, the wording of this is, I mean, again, this is a very charged and
but I think, you know, he's kind of, but Elazar, at the same time, I hear from Israelis, you people came in the 7th century from the Arab Peninsula. You guys are colonizers. And therefore, it's kind of set for both, is that Israelis also need to be educated, that Palestinians also have centuries of roots in this land as well.
So here, I made the change. Both educational system making both sides aware of history and political narrative of both sides in both public schools.
Okay, I want to specify though what I said, because my caveat was not so much about the content of what we teach, but about the fact that what is being taught is considered a domain of sovereignty for both national movements. And I mean, Israelis and the EU pester the Palestinians so much over the kind of alleged bullshit incitements in their textbooks. The incitement that they're after is uprooting the Palestinian national narrative. It's exactly this vision of history that Israel is dedicated to uprooting, because Israel views this narrative as a threat to its sovereignty.
All right, let's have the parliament members. Let's have the parliament members vote on this again, because we need to move on. We can't have Israeli Palestinian parliament members on the amended legislation. Okay, let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Israeli parliament members, please vote. Okay, both sides voted in favor of this legislation. And let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto the amended legislation?
No, I will not.
Let's go to the Palestinian president. Mr. President, are you going to veto this amended legislation?
No, I'm so afraid of you that I wouldn't dare.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So share the results. All right. Let's go to the next legislation, and that is rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. Libby, could you please read the legislation?
Rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. The IPC is the only legitimate government in Israel and Palestine, consisting of 300 parliament members elected by the entire population. Approximately 125 members represent the destroyed areas. The IPC is committed to the well-being of all people, including the 5 million individuals directly affected by the violence since October 7th. The IPC believes that the future of the Gaza and Israeli people is interconnected. It is unlikely that the Israeli and Palestinian governments will be able to restore a normal, peaceful existence in the foreseeable future. The IPC is requesting a $50 billion grant from the international community, which includes Israel and Palestine, to fund and coordinate the rebuilding of the devastated areas. The IPC will prioritize the following: rebuilding thousands of homes, roads, hospitals, civic buildings, and infrastructure to facilitate the immediate return of all people to their homes. 2, restoring law and order and civil society that have been destroyed. 3, developing safe routes for peaceful movement of Palestinians between the West Bank and Gaza in both directions. To achieve this rebuilding, the IPC is calling for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate return of all political prisoners in Israel and Palestine to their homes. Both the Israeli and Palestinian governments are given veto power.
All right. If you have any questions regarding this legislation, please put them in the chat. In the meantime, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. This shows you the political power that the the federal government has obtained, because it is able to go around the world and seek revenues, grants to rebuild Gaza and Southern Israel. Neither the Israeli nor the Palestinian governments are able to do that. The only entity that would be able to do that would be the federal government. And since we are in a simulation now, so I am simulating that I am the president and I have the political power given to me by the 5 million people who voted in this for this federal government to demand to go out and demand grants from all over the world. So here we have 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voting in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Publish the vote. Let's go to the Palestinian president. Mr. President, are you going to veto this legislation?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Do you want us to make any changes to the legislation, or are you just vetoing it outright?
No, I'm not vetoing it. On the contrary, I'm approving it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
Well, Israel accepts this legislation with the understanding that all building on Israeli territories in the Gaza envelope, for example, will be controlled by Israeli local municipal governments. Israel will accept the dollars, the rebuilding dollars that the IPC gathers, But we emphasize that the IPC will only provide funds, and the actual rebuilding, the planning and the control and the supervision will, for the actual physical rebuilding, will be by Israeli municipal governments.
Mr. Prime Minister, we are actually asking you to contribute to the $50 billion, and we intend to spend the money proportionately to the devastation that was created after October 7th. So to us, it makes no difference whether it is Israel or Gaza. We are going to spend the money, and we are asking you to contribute to that rebuilding.
Well, contributing has nothing to do whether we accept the legislation. We can accept the legislation and either contribute or not contribute. And I'm not going to decide on how we're going to contribute today, though I suspect that when we go to the Israeli legislation, we will contribute for the rebuilding on Israeli territory. And we will do that directly and not through the IPC. But
Okay.
we accept this legislation because we see that the IPC will help us contribute, help us fund the rebuilding that has to take place.
You got it totally wrong. This is not a way to funnel money into your government. This is a way to build the entire area of Israel and Gaza, regardless of whether it falls under. And by the way, a huge number of the devastation was created by your government. We are basically helping you in what is your responsibility, which is to rebuild Gaza.
No,
we are basically
our government didn't cause the devastation. The devastation was caused by the illegal, inhumane attacks, massacre of October 7th. And it was caused by Hamas, not by our government.
But nothing, your bombs, your airplanes, your missiles caused the devastation. Do not try to run away from it. It is your responsibility to rebuild Gaza, because if you know very well that if Gaza is not being rebuilt, the security of Israel is going to be in jeopardy forever. So how are you planning to rebuild Gaza if it wasn't for the IPC? Are you planning just to walk away from Gaza?
The Israeli government doesn't accept your construction of what happened and why the destruction took place. It was our bombs, but our bombs are only used because of what happened on October 7th. It all comes back to what Hamas did on October 7th.
I am the president of the whole area. No. I have legitimacy from the whole entire area. And should you not be willing to contribute funding to the devastation that was created by your government, I'm going to go around the world and in Israel and expose you as a person that decided to create the devastation on Gaza and just walk away from it. And here we have an opportunity of $50 billion from the entire world, and you just want to play politics to the detriment of the people of Gaza and to the detriment of your people by just playing political games.
Well, we don't think it's political games. We think the true problem was what Hamas did out of the blue for no reason at all on October 7th.
It's not out of the blue, Mr. Jeff. It is not out of the blue. Learn history.
No, it's not.
Regardless of what you think or not, we are not here to decide whether the Gaza was correct or incorrect in what they're doing. We are here to talk about the future. And the future is that we have a huge opportunity to rebuild not only Gaza, but also Southern Israel, which, by the way, you failed to rebuild, and you failed to have your people in Israel coming back to southern Gaza. So that's how I am going to frame it. I'm going to frame it that you are playing games with your own people, with the future of your own people. And so your condition that we are going to funnel the money to you is unacceptable. We are going to be the people who will be administrating the funding for the people of Gaza and Israel, the people that you failed to protect, and you failed to have them return, and you failed to have them rebuilt.
But you can go around to the world and tell whatever tale you want. We have our diplomacy, and we clearly believe that none of this would have happened without the unprovoked attacks on October 7th.
Unprovoked, huh?
Yeah,
nothing will happen. Nothing like this will happen if the Zionist mafia never start the war against Palestine in 1947. So get it straight here. We're not here to discuss history and blame each other. We are here to start a new ways and stop accusing us of the October 7 by Hamas, when Hamas was created by your own government against the PA. So stop this madness.
Well, okay, but the good news is, Mr. Prime Minister, is that I believe you will agree to remove your condition and accept this legislation.
Well, I accept Israel has accepted the legislation. That was the first words I said, that Israel accepts this legislation, and we're explaining that any building will be done under the physical building will be controlled by Israeli municipalities following Israeli law for any building done on Israel.
What does Israel law have to do with Gaza's construction? 200,000 people does not have houses right now. What does it have to do? What does Israel have to do with this? Come on, man.
All right. Okay, so the Israeli Prime Minister did not veto this legislation. Let me just tell you, I know Jeff personally, his views are opposite of what he is being asked to do as a Prime Minister of Israel. So just for the record, I want to clarify for the audience that in real life, I believe Jeff's personal views are opposite of what he is saying. He's just playing along to demonstrate, and I think he does a great job of demonstrating.
If he's acting, that's a different story. I apologize, but if he's
in real life, he is
an actor.
Okay, he's a good actor, and so is Rami.
I apologize, Jeff. I apologize.
No offense taken. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. So the purpose is to demonstrate the power that the federal government will have in its ability to create a new future for the people of Israel and Palestine. So we are running out of time. Let's have an open discussion now, because it's taking let's have Elik give his comments, and then we'll go around and discuss this the simulation. Elik, can you make your comments, please?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again very much for having me. This is a fascinating exercise and very instructive. I think talking in general about everything I witnessed today and the whole thing, I still stay with my initial comment that I think theoretically and conceptually there are things that are remain ill-defined. And this sort of ill definition is an opening for it is an opening for a disagreement, and it's an opening for contending narratives to intervene. And this is precisely the place where the federal government will have to kind of step in and weigh in. And without any discussion of enforcement, I think we're left in a deadlock. And I'll explain. I'll explain what I mean. The questions of education, the questions of rebuilding, the questions of allocating resources are not questions that can be separated from the issues of sovereignty, which, again, I say, cannot be limited to only the ability to exercise power over a certain territory. We are talking here about two nationalist movements, and in nationalist movements, these issues have other subjective but no less important meanings. And these questions, I think, will always will create openings for conflicts, for collisions, for fighting over power. For example, in this curriculum, let's say that we instill this curriculum, and schools in Israel have to teach that Palestinians are human beings, which they do not do today. They do quite the opposite, and even the little bit of humanity granted to the Palestinians in our textbooks have been expelled by the former governments. We decide on that, and Israeli schools do not teach that. They keep teaching the old racist, indoctrinating school books that we use today. What does the federal government can do here? And this is not a far-fetched issue. Let's just think, I won't say more, but let's think of Little Rock, okay? Where the federal government had to step in with violence, with a certain means of enforcing its decisions. This is, again, one issue. The same issue will come up again when we talk about the allocating of resources. Are we really going to take money from the international community to rebuild illegal settler colonialist habitations built on indigenous land? This is one interpretation of reality. Are we really going to use the international money, community's money, to build hiding places for terrorists right on the Israeli border, even if they camouflage themselves as schools and UNRWA facilities? This is another position. The federal government will have to weigh in one way or another, and for that it needs a certain ability to enforce its decision, meaning it has to consider this notion of monopoly over violence. Now, I understand the reluctance to do that, and in many places in the world there is no such tool in the hands of the federal government. Like, for example, in Germany, the federal state doesn't have any means of enforcing its decisions, but only controls the military. The same here, the example that I gave, the EU. However, how do they do that? Through other means of enforcement, non-direct coercion, non-direct violence, which I think was exercised very well here by the president. And you saw how scared the Palestinian prime minister was. This is a form of violence, a form of enforcing one's decision. And again, if we are willing to look at examples such as the EU, nothing undermines the legitimacy of the federal government, of this kind of superseding body, as this kind of, behind the scenes, behind the curtains way of enforcing decision. These ideas that, And again, we return to the notion of sovereignties, which is exactly the thing that is tearing the United States apart, the rights of states versus the rights of the federal government. This is the thing that is tearing the EU apart, the sovereignty of states, particularly where it comes to dealing with education and other funds that are deemed that the government, the sovereign governments, are deemed dispensable in regards to. I think that, as this discussion showed, I mean, these are issues that and mechanisms that somehow must be taken into consideration in order for such an exercise to have validity. Now, of course, I understand, and this is how you started. There is no perfect legislation. There is no perfect political system. There is an attempt and there is striving. And in that sense, I mean, this initiative is, of course, a blessed one. I think that this discussion should open up towards engaging with those issues, the questions of sovereignty beyond the exercise of power, but as a subjective constituent of identity, and to the discussion of the monopoly of violence and the question of how the federal government can enforce its decisions. Because, I mean, even if you threat shaming and humiliation, this is still a manner of using violence, even if it's not the official state-sanctioned one. These things, I mean, again, I just need to be discussed, and a certain platform needs to be included where these things are discussed. And the idea is that a certain middle ground can be found where you can thread the needle in a sort of decision that will beat the opposition of both sides and would let something come through. I think it's a position that is not without risk. And I can give you the example from, again, my field of expertise, what is known as the brown and red curriculum. I talked about this problem before, where anti-Nazi education in the Baltic states, in the former states occupied by the Soviet Union, was perceived as an infringement on their sovereignty. In their narrative, the Soviets were the bad guys, the Nazis were the good guys, and teaching the opposite is harmful to their national identity and to their national rights. Which was definitely a difficulty that the European Union did not perceive. But the European Union did thread the needle, did find a middle solution that would work for everybody. They said, okay, you know, we could all agree that free market is what we're after. Free market is what we want. So let's say the Soviets were bad, the Nazis were bad, everyone that opposed the free market is bad. And now that we put all the, you know, people on both sides, the bad people on both sides out of the game, let us proceed. And I don't know if anyone followed the recent elections to the EU. This is not a method that grants legitimacy to the federal body. So I do think that these are all issues that need to be considered and need to be thought. Today, fortunately, there's a great deal of literature available on the collapse of this federal system, both from the right and from the left, that deal exactly with that. How do we keep the subjective components of politics in the procedural game and not expel them? Because when we expel them, people feel that their sovereignty is hurt and the federal body loses legitimacy. And these are things to be wary about when we promote such a project.
All right, let's go to Shlomo and then Said and then Fumiko. Shlomo.
Number one, I agree with everything that Elik said. I think the EU is a good example that we should not necessarily follow exactly, but we should examine and compare and maybe improve on. Number two, the point of education is crucial, and I agree about that too. But there is all we can do is teach the two completely different versions. There is a problem, and I find this again and again talking to people like the one that was represented by Jeff Warner, even though he was not, he was playing it. It's that the facts are not known. And what are I mean, you can talk about my truth versus you. No, there is one truth, and that's the problem that we will face. And I'm not saying this this makes it all invalid. No, on the contrary. But this is the real problem is the facts that are being disappeared from many history books, and that will be a problem. Anyway, I just pointed to it. But yeah, those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, Said. Hi.
Yes, I appreciate you being here, sir. And one thing I like to bring to this meeting here, just for us to be together and for the Palestinians to be recognized as equal human people as you, this is a start. And you know what? With two-state solution, with one-state solution, what we are forgetting that we need to speak one-to-one as we speak in today. The problem is, I could sit with Joseph in Los Angeles, but I cannot sit with my neighbor in Ofra when I'm from Al-Mizrah Sharqiyya. The problem is that we need to speak together. When you have 30, 40,000 Palestinians who go work in Israel every day, these people are force of communication between two nations, but these people have no power to speak for us. Who's speaking for us? Haniya, or whatever you want to call it from the BA. It's time for us to allow people to speak and to vote and to determine how they're going to live their life together. That's what's the power of this simulation, and that's what's the power of the common government. Talk to the people, let the people decide on both sides. I see a lot of Jewish people. I never sat with a Jewish in my life. This is my first time sitting with a Jewish called Joseph Abbasar, and my life has changed. Let the people know each other, sit with each other as Jewish and Palestinians, and see what they can come together, and then the peace will follow. As long as we go in and worrying about what's the government gonna do, what's the government gonna do, what we think, what we don't think, and what we not forget, we not involving the people. This is one of the major problems that we've been having for over 70 years. I remember before the Intifada, we used to go to Tel Aviv. My father take us in the car and take us to Tel Aviv, eat in Abu Afia for breakfast, and come back in the same day. Right now, going to Ramallah takes my mom 45 minutes, 14 miles away, 14 kilometers. So it's time for us to speak as people and understand each other, communicate with each other, and start putting the road for peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Said. Fumiko?
Yep. I really agree what Said said. Actually, so as far as education is concerned, I'm under impression that something is lacking. So just so you were talking about public school teaching, right? Okay, yeah. And so that's very, very important. That future generation, and so I have, I have an impression that there has been no sort of contact, constant contact, interaction each other, between Israeli and and Palestinian, as far as the education is concerned. Just in one way, and so Israeli side doing whatever they want, and so Palestinian side also is doing their own way, and then like kind of in a fence, between the fence, and then so from Tel Aviv side, and so just European city, one of the European city, but the other side from the above, and then so you find, oh, what's the difference? And then and so teenager, especially teenager in Tel Aviv, they don't know what kind of life they're doing at the other side. Right. And so I think so Joseph's son is trying to do is just a starting point. Okay, so we don't have to go up to the kind of academic level. Okay, but first at the public school level, and we started. I think that's the way. Communication, frequent communication.
Right.
Okay,
right.
not only in the educational field, but also other field. That's just and also I thank you for and gathering together, and then so we just after listening to what you have been discussing, and I just a little bit worried about they are getting very emotional, and then so but in the end they are very very educated, and they are very nice, and so that's the one way. Really, so there's a kind of clue here. So to have a kind of hope in the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hamika. All right. So let me make concluding remarks, and then I'll let Elik make his concluding remarks. We were going to deal with make peace with Iran, Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria, but that I decided not to deal with it because we're running out of time, and open the discussion also. Not going to do it because we're running out of time. Let's have a post-simulation survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine? Please vote. I'm going to allow another 15 seconds to vote. Okay, publish the vote. So this time it's the number is lower, but it's 97% agreed. It was 95% agreed with it, and 1 out of 32 said no, and that's 3%. So in terms of percentage, we have improved. In terms of number, the total number in the simulation went down of the participants, so it's hard to compare. I believe a common democratic confederation government can bring peace. That's the issue. It may not be a perfect solution. It may not deal with each and every issue raised by each and every person, but that's the general idea, is to have a common federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine to make peace. Online elections is feasible. It would take somewhere around $100 million to do it if we have the awareness, to create the awareness. The war between Gaza and Israel cost $3 billion a week. The current governments are not legitimate in the area of Israel and Palestine because they're not elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. It makes perfect sense to have a legitimate government, secular, democratic government for the entire area of Israel and Palestine that would be responsible to the people themselves to make peace. And that could be done by a democracy that would include the people of Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. So I'm going to give Elik another opportunity to make his final comments, and then we will conclude. Elik?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you again for inviting me and for allowing me to participate in this.
By the way, did anyone tell you that you look like that movie star? I forgot his name, but he's in. If anyone, you look like him. Everybody likes Raymond.
No, that's a first.
Okay. Every time I look at you, it's like, oh wow. Okay, go ahead.
I hope he's very good looking. I'll check out who is this.
Yeah. And look at the show. Everybody likes Raymond. I forgot the name of the star of that show, but yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Ray Romano.
Yeah, Ray Romano.
In that case, I'm even happier. I mean, I want to congratulate you on this effort. I mean, I think it's worthy and I think it's very important. I would like very much to thank Brother Said here for his words. Nothing is truer. We do need to speak. This is not more than that. This is particularly in the Israeli side, the main objective of the government for years now has been to prevent dialogue and unmediated communication between Israelis and Palestinians. And this is the thing we need the most, any platform where we can get together and discuss and think about these issues is, I mean, is a wonderful opportunity. Of course, I mean, it's not simple. And when we talk, I mean, we can see both the problems, theoretical and procedural problems that came up in this discussion, and what I was trying to point at, mainly the subjective, emotional, identitarian issues that come up. And we can see that very well in this discussion when the poor Prime Minister of Israel did have to receive quite a bit of heckling from the crowd, even though everybody knows that this is a simulation, that we role play. And yeah. So imagine if it was real. Imagine.
I truly doesn't know. Otherwise, I'll be quiet.
No. It's totally okay. And but Said, you were not the first. There were several people before you, and Nasser, I could see you correcting them in the chat. Emotions run high. This is a trend because when we talk about these things, there is a tendency, and particularly in Western liberal politics, to put aside emotional, subjective, identitarian issues and deal with procedures, deal with the mechanics of governing and of democracy. However, emotions, subjective opinions are the most important thing, because this is how people decide if they support or disapprove. People don't do a materialist, people don't do a rational calculation before they decide to fight for this cause or that cause. They make an emotional, subjective, identitarian calculation. So I do think it is imperative to include consideration and modalities for discussing these issues in the working of and in the deliberations of the Confederation. And again, I will go back to my own field of expertise and my own. We are not new. This is not the first time something like this happens in the world. This is not the first two nations trying to resolve how to live on one territory.
One land.
There were modalities in the past. There were issues like this in the past. There were no good solutions in the past, as the history of Europe can teach us. When we put aside the emotional, identitarian, and subjective issues, the outcome is frustration, anger, and bloodshed. We owe it to ourselves intellectually, but also physically, to give place to these issues, to these considerations of identity and the subjective interpretations of all these issues. As I went again and again, the EU is another example of trying to make this particular circle square. And it's not working, A place for discussing emotions, discussing ideas face to face as human beings is, first of all, politically important. Second of all, if you want, I'll refer you to the relevant, I mean, this is a crucial political moment from which we can start to build a future together. But the future can start from recognizing each one's subjective position and not by imposing a new procedural structure from which people are alienated. These are my comments. Again, thank you very much. This exercise is
Thank you
fascinating,
so much.
and the encounter is very uplifting and hopeful. And again, I'm honored to be among such esteemed.
Thank you so much, Elik, for your time and your generosity in helping. I also want to thank Jeff and Rami for agreeing to take part in the simulation, assuming a personality that is not their own and being subjected to harassment by me, and I apologize if they took it personally. I'm sure they did not take it personally. They understand this is a simulation, but I want to thank you nevertheless. And I hope to see all of you again in the next simulation with Jill Stein on September 1st. And
just make
thank
sure.
you.
Thank you, Joseph. Make sure you open the guest for more than 100 people with Stein, because there is a lot of people gonna be in. And plus, I like to add a few things if you allowed me less than half a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, for you all guys, especially the Jewish part of you, remember we are facing very evil time today. Evil is controlling everybody. And for me just to come out among my people and speak about this, they call me every bad name you can imagine. Yesterday, they cussed my mom, they cussed my dead father, and they call me snitch, they call me a jasus, because I am just saying that let's talk and let's find a common ground to live together. It's not an easy thing to do this. It's tough, but guess what? That's the only thing to do it, and we're gonna do it no matter what happens.
What did they do to your mom?
Yeah, I was in a live in TikTok yesterday, and as soon as they recognize my voice, they start telling me Jewish lover, Zionist lover. My daughter, my 13 years old daughter, married to a Zionist. My mom is a whore. Start cussing my father in his grave, just because I said we have to live together and we have to find a common ground. So evil is in control. A lot of bad people, a lot of people are brainwashed. But no matter what happened, we have to be strong. One of my best example is Miko Balid, when he came to Jerusalem to bury his niece, and that turns him to be who he is today. In difficulties, we should be, brave, and should look at the reality and find the solution, not to create more problem. Thank you, guys.
All right. Okay. Thank you all. I appreciate your participating, and hope to see you again on September 1st.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.